Be sure to go to flipsidegaming.com and use promo code 6 for 10% off on orders over $10. It's a great deal. It helps support the show, and they do have those sweet Theros pre-orders. We have it in Arena. Don't have it in paper just yet. Speaking of having it in Arena, Theros is finally here. I'm recording this the day of. That's why this is coming up late. I literally am recording this at 12:12, hoping to get this out about 1 o'clock. We'll see if that happens. Anyway, today I'm going to be opening some packs up, talking a little bit about the mastery system, and I'm going to be going over a couple decks that I think are going to be decent budget builds for people who are either new to Arena and don't know what exactly they should craft, or people who have played recently and just aren't sure like where to take their decks or what decks are probably okay positioned. And I kept them nice and simple. So first we're going to start off with the packs. I'm just going to go ahead and open up some of these. These came with the Mastery Pass, blah, blah, blah. It's nothing special. We're going to get to the Theros packs real quick. I do want to say before I get to the Theros packs, I'm going to be opening most of these 10 at a time. I'm getting all of the cards. It's just showing me the rares or mythics from each of those cards. Now we can see here that this is showing me all of the cards that I've opened for the first time. We got this. Awesome. And I'm going to jump really quickly over here and look at my collection, and you'll now see that these new cards are up here, and not only are they up here, they're up here in the front. So we go ahead and do this, then let's reset filters, and now they're gone again. Right, so I really appreciate that Wizards has put in this new tab, so you can see what the new cards you have are. So I'm going to start opening these cards 10 at a time, see all the cool stuff we're getting. I absolutely adore the first tab. Apparently I got one of those already. Alright, I got one from the Mastery thing, the pre-order. It's fine. Shh, no one has to know. And yeah, I'm super excited for this set. As you can see, you know, I've opened these cards already. It's not going to show me, but I will know. Oh, this is my first one of these. If I'm trying to make a deck with it, I am. Then I have to get more. I absolutely appreciate these new quality of life changes that Wizards has. Also up here, you can see I have 2 sealed entries. That was from the pre-order. We'll see in the Mastery set in just a second. It looks like they're going to be using these tokens a little bit more often, and frankly, I like it. These can be mixed into rewards, and I just really like what they could offer. For what it's worth, they should give these out more often in real life, but we'll see if that happens. Now, those are all the packs I wanted to open. We're going to talk really quickly about the Mastery system. I did pre-order. If you pre-ordered and you haven't gotten your levels and stuff yet, give it a second, keep restarting and logging back in. I think it took me 2 or 3 times before everything registered properly. It should work out for you. Now, like usual, you have the initial purchase of the Mastery system. You got the sweet sleeve, absolutely lovely. The owl, I don't like any of the pets so far. I really don't care about them. And then that fantastic avatar. I think Elspeth looks great. Better than some of the other avatars. Cough, cough. Second Chandra. But that's besides the point. And as you'll see, just like usual, this top portion, just packs and stuff, still totally fine. Whether or not you want to buy this Mastery Pass is entirely up to you. Just remember that it is retroactive, so if you are playing and you don't know how many levels you're going to gain, at any point, if you buy the set Mastery, you get all of the rewards up to that level that you are now. So if you want to buy it the day before a new set comes out, that's totally fine. If you want to buy it now and grind continuously, you can also do that. Or you could just ignore it. You know, this is meant to be an extra thing. It has mostly cosmetics. You do get like extra gold and stuff, but that doesn't make your deck any better, right? You're not going to get any particular cards that are objectively better or anything. It's just mostly cosmetics and more stuff for your time, which is reasonable. Like it's still a good value. Now, this has, where was it? I think it was on this page. Yeah. So this also is going to come with a ranked draft entry. And I think that's really cool. I like that they're adding this. I don't recall it being there last time, but it's nice because if someone is just grinding in standard and they really just don't touch a limited at all, this, you know, it's a free entry for limited. They might try limited, they might like it, they might play more. So I definitely appreciate that stuff. And then the rest of the seems pretty normal. And then, of course, we have this exquisite sleeve, which is just absolutely lovely. We have the owl upgrading, just like normal, you know, the normal stuff. And then here we get up to 90 because this is going to be less. This set is shorter. The set lifetime is shorter than Eldraine. That's because the fall set is usually like the longest running set. Wizards, in my opinion, should make things more evenly spaced for Standard, and in my opinion, Standard rotation should happen every time a new set comes out. So the new set replaces the very oldest set, so every set in Standard gets to see play in Standard for the maximum amount of time. But that's just the opinion of some random dude on the internet. Whatever. But as you can see, we're still going to get those infinite uncommon rewards, and I think that is just fantastic. Going over to the Mastery Tree to see how it looks. Once again, they are really nailing it, in my opinion, with these Mastery tracks, giving us iconography that makes sense for the sets. For what it's worth, the Eldraine one I thought was just a tad bit weak when you're comparing it to this and kind of the Ravnica one as well. But that said, once again, I still hate the way that these cosmetics are designed. I doubt Wizards is ever going to change that, unfortunately. I really hope that they do, but I doubt they're going to, just because it's kind of a lazy effect, the mirroring. Honestly, I would prefer them to just like zoom the art in a little bit if they wanted to get a full art effect, but that's besides the point. But yeah, I just wanted to show that off. And then I'm going to talk really quickly about these budget decks. Now, I try to keep these decks as budget as possible, and I had some different considerations for that, right? I wanted to think of the number of cards, the number of rare cards people are likely to already have, the number of rare cards people are probably going to be able to get use out of later on if they end up abandoning this deck, and then the amount of rare cards that they have to craft overall. So I decided to keep these to 12 rare / mythics, and the reason I decided to do / mythics is just because even though the wild cards are differently rare, right? The rare ones are easier to come across than the mythic ones. The rare ones are often used more quickly, so I kind of consider them roughly equivalent in terms of value. So I decided to keep them down to 12 rares only, 12 rares and mythics. And then I tried to make sure as many of them were reasonably movable. We got some new here. But let's go over here, and I'm just going to talk through this really quickly. I'm actually going to start with the rare so you can understand why I went with the rares that I did. So I have Knight of the Ebon Legion here, and this is a mono black devotion deck. The white one is essentially a mono white devotion deck. The reason I have Knight of the Ebon Legion in here is because this card has seen some decent amount of play. It's played in Vampires, it was played in the Rakdos aggro deck, it's played in Knights, and it's currently played in mono black. I don't see this card really going anywhere in terms of its playability. It's a very good value for what it is. So if you aren't sure, I think this is a totally good card for you to craft. If you have to, you can probably switch this out with something a little bit weaker, say a Grim Physician, although for what it's worth, this card does really give you a ton of value because the amount of damage that it can deal. Then, of course, we have Midnight Rider. Murderous Rider. Murderous Rider is a card that sees play like everywhere because of how versatile this card is. It's a card that is going to destroy things and or be a sweet zombie knight. It's played in control decks, it's played in mid-range decks, and it's played in more aggressive decks that happen to run black. So I think this is definitely a safe craft. Ayara I kept to 2 because of the fact that she is played in significantly fewer decks. Namely, she's played in like mono black because she has 3 black pips. That's why I decided to keep her at 2. That said, you know, if you played Aristocrats that was heavy black, or if you don't mind having, you know, 2 cards kind of forcing you to stay into black, I think this is totally fine. For what it's worth, you can potentially replace this with the Priest of Forgotten Gods, because Priest of Forgotten Gods can go into Rakdos sacrifice decks a little bit easier. That said, she's better for this deck because of the 3 black pips. But I did want to keep her 2 just because she only really goes into this deck. And then we have 2 of the new rares. Nightmare Shepherd. This card's great. I don't know if it'll go anywhere else. You know, 4 mana flying 4/4 that has some cool death stuff is pretty good. It's played in this deck because whenever another non-token creature you control dies, you can just make a new copy. That's fantastic with something like Grey Merchant, which I'll talk about in a second, where you can get its ability twice. You can get a Yark's Fenlurk ability twice. Things like that are just very fantastic. And you can sack things with Ayara, so it's really nice. That said, the reason I kept this at 2 is, 1, I don't know how long this card's going to be in Mono Black Devotion. I don't know if Mono Black Devotion is going to go in a different route or anything, so that's why I only kept it at 2. I also don't know if it's going to apply to any other decks. So, I hope you kind of understand why I went with the cards that I did, and now I'll talk about the rest of the deck. So the main purpose of the deck is to drain your opponent with Grey Merchant of Asphodel. This card drains, your opponent loses life, and you gain that amount of life, where equal to your devotion to black. So him by himself, right, will enter the battlefield and drain your opponent for 2 because you have 2 black pips right on him. If, say, you have a Deathless Knight only, and then you cast Grey Merchant, it'll be 6 total. So that's kind of how the deck works. And you want to get your opponent to a point where you just play Grey Merchant and they die. Or you can play trains of Grey Merchants, etc., and that's going to be helpful to you. So how do we get to that point? Well, we have 4 Falmare Knights to, 1, be a decent blocker that also adds a pip, and or something where you can use it to draw a card. You know, if you top deck this and later on in the game, you can use it as a sweet draw card that also happens to have Death Touch. So it's a nice versatile card in that respect. I'm going to not talk about the rares, we already talked about those. Cling to Dust can do a very similar thing. I don't know how much graveyard shenanigans are going to occur, but since there's a bit of graveyard mechanics in the set, words are hard to find. Since there are a few graveyard mechanics in the set, I wanted to make sure that there's some preparation here. So this is a nice thing, you know, if you are facing off against a really stupid Uro Titan deck, you can go ahead and exile that, you gain some life, it helps off against a little bit of the more aggressive strategies where you can not die as fast, or you can just exile something annoying from your control opponent's graveyard and you get to filter, you draw a card, right? Also, you're not playing with your graveyard all that much. Obviously, Nightmare Shepherd does stop you from getting too many cards in your graveyard, but for what it's worth, you can use this over and over again via its escape cost, so that's nice. Timoret is hopefully going to have a big ass. When I say big ass, of course, I mean high toughness, because by itself, it's a 2-mana 2/2, not the best, but as soon as this becomes a 2-mana 2/3, or, you know, go Timoret into Iara, and bada bing bada boom, you have a 2/5 for 2 mana, that's pretty damn good. And when you factor in the fact that you can just exile 2 cards from graveyards, it doesn't have to be a single graveyard, which is fantastic, and you gain life for each creature exiled this way. It's an amazing blocker against aggro, and it's okay against control insofar as you can just annoy their game plan if it involves their graveyard at all. Yark's Fenlurker is a monster of a card. Not only is it 2 black pips for your sweet devotion, but it also just forces your opponent to exile a card. And since this is a graveyard mechanics focused standard, probably, it means your opponent isn't going to get value out of their card being in the graveyard. It's going to be gone. The fact that it can buff itself is kind of nice, although it costs a lot. The shade ability here is not the cheapest of shade abilities, so you're not often going to be using this, especially compared to something like Knight of the Ebon Legion's ability, but you're going to be using it often enough that it is nice gravy. We, of course, have Deathless Knight as well. A Deathless Knight, sorry. It is a 4-mana 4/2 with haste. Not the best stats, but it is something that can come out of nowhere and hit your opponent hard and fast. And what's nice is that whenever you gain life for the first time, you can return it from your graveyard to your hand. And we do have a decent number of ways to gain life. Cling to Dust, Timoret, Murderous Rider, Iara, Grey Merchant are all ways in this deck to gain life. And being able to just keep rebuying this card to get some sweet haste is fantastic. 4 Drag to the Underworld is a decent removal spell. We're not playing any rare removal here besides Murderous Rider, just because I don't know if 8-2 Extinction is even worth it when we just smoke our opponents to death. We don't need to care about their Planeswalkers if they're dead. So, excuse me, this card is often going to be 2 mana. And the reason for that is we have so many cards that have 2 or more black pips that it's unlikely you're ever going to need to be paying full price for this, and if you are, you're probably in a pretty bad spot. Anyway, I just want to say, the real flavor text to this card is not whatever it is there. It's Choke Me Harder Daddy. And then we're only rocking the 24 Swamps. The reason I have 24 here is because you do want to make sure you're getting to your Grey Merchants consistently. It's possible that maybe you go down to 23, but what you really probably want to be doing here is adding in, I don't know why there's green, is adding in Castle Locthwain. That is a card that you might want to consider. You also might want to consider, if you're taking this out of budget, to up your numbers of Iara and Nightmare Shepherd, possibly by dropping Deathless Knight down to 2 or even 1. Drag to the Underworld, you probably don't need a full playset of, since you do have access to Murderous Rider, and I'm not sure if you need Cling to Dust necessarily, but as I said, this is a kind of graveyard hefty set, so we'll see. But this deck is pretty fine out of the box, in that you really don't need many more cards in order to upgrade it. It should be fine-ish, good, maybe, I don't know. But that brings us on to our next budget deck, which is Budget Mono White. This deck is essentially a life gain deck that aims to murder your opponent as fast as you can. This one has a few more mythics than the other one, but I hope that's not too much of an issue. And just like last time, I'm going to start by talking about the rares. We start off with Tomic, and this initially for me was Charming Prince, because Charming Prince gains his life. However, the fact that Tomic is a flyer and a 2/3 is the reason this card is just fantastic here. This is something that can kind of break those ground tiebreakers, where you and your opponent just have a huge army on the ground and no one can do anything, you just have a nice standstill. This card says, nah, I'm going to put a bunch of +1/+1 counters on it and smoke my opponent in the face. Lands on the battlefield, stuff, it doesn't matter all that much. I don't think there's anything that Tomic really fights against in the standard format. But Tomic is just a very fantastic evasive blocker, or attacker, sorry. Then we have 3 Heliads. The reason this is technically a devotion deck. Whenever you gain life, you put a 1/1 counter on a creature or enchantment you control. This makes your cards real big, real fast. There are so many ways to gain life in this deck, not only the creatures innately having lifelink, but we have ATB triggers, and of course, Heliod himself can grant lifelink to our creatures. Notably, this is whenever you gain a life, so it's not whenever you gain 1 or more life. This triggers at every instant of life gain, which is important with the next card. But we can distribute counters amongst our creatures, or we can pile up on one card, like I said we could do with Tomic. Linden is the card that actually makes this insane. Now, I want to believe that Wizards made Linden knowing good and well that Heliod was on his way, because a lot of people were really disappointed with Linden when she came out, because she seemed like the weakest of the triple pip leaders from the different houses in Eldraine. And in general, I agree with that. However, she's gotten pretty decent with the set. Not only does she add 3 entire pips for Heliod, meaning that Heliod is almost certainly going to be a creature as soon as you play Linden, because you're probably going to have one of these other creatures in play, but she works so fantastically well with him, because whenever a white creature you control attacks, you gain 1 life. This stacks fantastically with a Johnny's Pridemate, but you have Heliod, each creature you attack with, at minimum, can make it get 1 bigger because of Heliod. So, absolutely fantastic card in this specific deck. You might be seeing a little bit of a pattern with this deck, and this deck was really hard for me to try and decide on cards. I'm going to talk about the last card before I address some of the other aspects of the rares that I chose. Then, of course, we have 3 Ajani Strength and Pride. This is a fantastic finisher. If we have a ton of life, we can just exile our opponent's stuff and hopefully swing in for the win. We gain a hefty amount of life if we need it, and then we can make more Ajani's Pridemates. This card is one of the ones I'm the least sure about, which is odd. I just don't know what other cards are meant to be played here necessarily. But now I'm going to talk about something that you might be concerned with. All of these cards kind of can only be played in this deck. Tomic technically can be played in Azorius Flyers. Linden, I don't see being played anywhere else. Heliod, I don't see being played anywhere else. And Ajani, I don't see being played anywhere else. However, the reason I wanted to talk about this deck as well is because sometimes the rares that you make are just going to need to be in a linear deck. So with the Grey Merchant deck, I tried to make that one as friendly to other decks as possible, whereas this one I tried to make it as strong as possible. These cards pretty much aren't replaceable. You can replace Tomic, you can replace Ajani, but Linden and Heliod are what make this deck a deck. And I just wanted to point out that fact and say, if you want to build mono white, and this is a good deck, if you want to build this deck, you are committing to it. I just want to make sure that you know that, because you can't, with the Grey Merchant deck, you can kind of get away with exchanging cards and play testing that before you decide to craft the rares. With this one, you really can't, because the deck does not work essentially at all without these cards. So I wanted to kind of talk about that difference there. Now let's talk about the rest of the deck. We have 4 Alcids of Life's Bounties. We have 4 Naked Dudes in the field. This card, pretty decent. 1 mana, 1/1 lifelink. But what's great about this card is you can just hold up a single mana to give a creature enchantment you control protection from a color of your choice. It protects you against things like Banishing Lights. It protects you against any targeted removal. It protects you against Storm's Wrath. Protects one of your creatures at least because it's target, but still, the fact that you have something that 1 can get bigger and innately has lifelink, so it can keep making itself bigger in conjunction with Heliod, but 2, has a sweet ability that allows you to protect one of your creatures is just real fucking nice. For Healer's Hawk, it flies and it has lifelink. It's like this, except it has better evasion, so it can actually get in there to gain some life. You know, this gets outpaced pretty big, pretty fast, sorry. But the fact that Healer's Hawk flies is really nice. That's pretty much it. 2 Gods Willing, more protection. Since we aren't playing a lot of interaction, we want to make sure that our opponent who is playing interaction isn't going to interact as well as they could. Johnny's Pridemate, another backbone of the deck. This card gets real big, real fast, and if you have something like God's Willing or an Elset out, you can use those things progressively to make it so that your opponent can't block. You know, if your opponent is playing nothing but black cards or black-red cards or something, and they only have one single color amongst the shared amongst the blockers, give that a Johnny's Pridemate protection from those colors, and smoke them in the face. Bada bing, bada boom, they're dead. Absolutely fantastic. It gets real big with Heliod. If he's your only creature that you're really looking to buff, you can put all of the buffs from Heliod onto a Johnny. This is Pridemate. And it's a big dude. I would suggest diversifying your bonds a little bit, but still. Impassioned Orator acts as kind of an extra Daxos, Daxos 5 and 6. Whenever a creature enters battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. It's not nearly as good as main Daxos, but, excuse me, it's still relatively fine. Main Daxos, though, is real swole. Very similar to Timoret in the other deck. This card has a pretty big butt. However, unlike Impassioned Orator, when this one, it's whenever a creature you control enters the battlefield or dies. So if your opponent's taking out your stuff, you're making your stuff bigger, which is real nice. Obviously with Ailsid, it works fantastically. You know, you sacrifice this triggers, you know, maybe Heliod then triggers, you make Daxos a little bit bigger, you give Daxos protection from the destruction spell that was just aimed at it. It's fantastic. Also, this dude is going to have a fat ass. Angel of Vitality, one of the weaker cards. However, I put this in here because she makes you get big faster, and she gets big pretty fast herself. You know, it's not going to be awful when you top deck a 3-mana 4/4 that's going to be gaining you a ton of life. You know, when you're attacking with Linden, you attack with even just 3 creatures, that's 6 extra life. If you have Heliod out, that's 3 triggers, and of course your Angel of Vitality potentially can be a sweet 7/7 like immediately. So I think Angel of Vitality is okay. Definitely one of the earlier cards that you might want to replace. The unfortunate bit is I don't actually know the best build of mono white. I think Impassioned Orator, God's Willing, Angel of Vitality, and maybe a Johnny are kind of the weaker cards in the deck. You can really see that the backbone is Ailsid, a Johnny's Pridemate, Daxos, and these 2. But for what it's worth, I think that as it is now, totally great to start with. For Banishing Lights, the interaction we have, it helps with our devotion, and it exiles anything we need it to. That's about it. 22 planes. Maybe I should have 23. Our curve stops at 3, so I'm less inclined to think that, you know, our average is 2.2. Maybe this should be 23. I don't know. If you think it should be, maybe you drop in a Johnny, maybe drop a Banishing Light, something like that. Getting Castle Ardenvale, just like the last deck needing the Castle Lockthwain, this card is fantastic because it gives you something to do with your mana. If you're kind of in that board stall position, maybe you're going against another mono white deck, you're then able to outpace them by just making a wider board than they have. And that wider board allows you to just go around them. And that's just fantastic. Of course, against against control, you can have this as a way to recover from board wipes, although not as well. It does just allow you to use your mana to add to your board without casting the better cards in your hand. So yeah, this is another deck that I think is pretty helpful. For newer players, I think it's pretty decent, and because this deck is a little bit less focused on deck changing in Standard, I do want to point out that including this deck for Historic, which I'll have to actually change the deck. Boop. Putting this deck in Historic allows you to include some of the even stronger cards in the Historic set. So we have Sarah Ascendant. Now we're going to be getting life pretty damn fast. This card has lifelink and can get flying quickly, so you easily can replace something like Healer's Hawk here. I don't know if in the Historic version you're going to want a max number of Ailsids, but Ailsid is still pretty... I'm saying that horribly wrong, I'm sure. But this card is still fantastic. But you also have access to Soul Warden, which is a faster way to gain a bunch of life because this triggers on any creature entering the battlefield, not just your own. easily replaces a couple of those Impassioned Orators, maybe even drop Daxos down to 3, but it just gives you some really nice cards to add in the Historic format. Now, these are just from the Historic Anthology set. There are possibly other cards in Historic that work really nicely with this. I'm not talking about those cards just now. I'm just saying that this card might not have standard mobility, but it does at the very least have some good Historic mobility. So that is it for my discard changes. That is it for my my 2 budget deck tech type things. I'm just gonna buy a lot more packs, a lot more Theros packs. Just gonna buy a lot more Theros packs. All right. Gotta take a drink of water. Really excited to play with Theros. I have a lot of decks that are on their way for sure. I still am not sure what deck is going to be the first one that I actually like play with. I'm going to be recording that tonight. It's going to be coming up tomorrow. A lot of decks, man. A lot of decks. Not sure what decks to play. Get a lot of temples. Temples are also great crafts because they go in any deck you need. I still don't know what deck I want to play first. There's so many. Honestly, I might get Mono Black out of the way just because it's like such an obvious deck. Like everyone's gonna be playing it, so I might be going with that. I really do hope you've enjoyed. Oh, I almost forgot. Pack code. If you go into the store and you type in "Play Theros," you get 3 free packs. I already like a dumbass already used it, so you can't see it work. But Play Theros. That's how you get 3 free Theros packs. I really hope you enjoy the video. I decided that, you know, just opening packs isn't as good, so when I do stuff like this in the future, I'm also going to include at least 2 budget decks for that new set that came out. So I hope that is something that you all are going to look forward to, as opposed to this being like a garbage video that not very many people watch because no one cares about opening packs. It's not true. Some people like opening packs, but I hope you've enjoyed this video. I'd like to thank my lovely patrons, especially Zen, for the continued support. If you'd like to join them in supporting the show, you can find links to the down in the description. Or, honestly, the best way to support the show is just watch this stuff, tap that like button, add subscription to your channel pool, cast a comment to the comment section down below, pass the turn, end the video to some of your friends, and of course, until next time, all will be one.